So while we're doing, I'm going to pose the first question, because I know you've probably got lots of questions, but it's to Matt, and Matt knows this is coming. Matt, obviously GFC is a big company. It's got 60% of the market volume from WA, but there are lots of small companies that want to get into China. And what you explained is an incredibly detailed blueprint for how a company can do it, but how do you do it if you're a small company?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me is to find the right partners in China, and you have to spend time to do that and really research, work with your partners to understand where the opportunities are and to be targeted with where you're going to focus your efforts. Because as I said, China's a huge market, and if you try and service China as one market, you will fail. But if you, as an example, focus on one city, the tier one cities in China are bigger, have more population, many of them, than the whole of Australia, so there's huge opportunities. Or even within those cities, servicing a handful of shops and finding markets and regions within the cities that are suited to your product, and then finding the partners who can help. So if you don't have the scale to be able to set up your own company or to be able to finance it yourself, there's no end of potential partners, and in that I can't recommend highly enough working with the state and federal departments up there. We use WA Trade extensively, and Austrade we have very close relationship with the embassy and all the consulates up there, so I would without a doubt start with them as well.
So have we got any questions? If we haven't, I've got another one for Matt. So Matt, in the GFC growth model, because I have heard some conversations happening, the opportunity for you to actually be a conduit not just for Western Rock lobster product, but actually to be, because you're so successful in China, to actually be used as one of the channels and not just Western Rock lobster. Is that going to, are we going to see that come to fruition and use your amazing skills in that area?
Well, I don't know about the amazing skills, but we're certainly open to, we are definitely open to leveraging the supply chain and leveraging what we've built, be it through our online sales platforms, be it through leveraging our infrastructure and those sorts of things. We're definitely open, and we've had discussions with various other industries and players to that end. So yeah, we see that there's a benefit there, not only for other industries and other players, but for our members as well, to be able to make their infrastructure and to leverage their investment into China.
Still any questions? I'm going to ask one of Serena if there isn't. Serena, you heard Stephen talking about the salmon story, you talk about the kingfish story, you're trying to sell your product into the market, it's very competitive out there. Some of those people don't realise we're now eating about 2.4 kilos of salmon per person per year, but that still is dwarfed by chicken and other products. So it sounds like not a lot, but it's very competitive out there. How are you going to make sure that you don't get swamped by the kingfish story or the salmon story?
So one of our biggest selling points coincides also with the consumer-driven focus on sustainability and food miles, and bearing in mind that we've had that experience dealing with premium markets like Japan, China and Korea in our previous incarnation. So each of our fish is individually spiked, ikijime. It gets to market within a couple of hours. We know that it has a shelf life of 2.5 weeks based on our trials. We've had wholesalers that we didn't tell them basically when the harvest date was, open it 2.5 weeks later and say, oh, was this caught yesterday? So it's pretty incredible. So it's about the sustainability angle, because you saw the lakes, they're totally self-contained. So we have no impact on the environment. That's a real key point. And there is a trend coming, it's starting on menus now. We have more and more chefs coming to us. We need the story. We're going to have a sustainable only menu, and we want a local So the local only is interesting too. So the Noosa Food and Wine Festival, which is occurring in May, they will not take product from anywhere outside of a 100-kilometre zone. So we just fit in there, but we do. So I think those two stand us in good stead locally, because we can prove, I don't know if we can get certified for the sustainable, self-sustaining in the lake. And I think the other one for the export market is the fact that, particularly with the groper, that it's a purebred species. So anything else that you see in Asia now is a hybrid species. It has to be that way because they're the only ones that can survive in aquaculture now. And so the purebred species branding is quite unique as well. And there is definitely a difference in the taste profile as well.
Might just add to that, Patrick. Over time, I guess Australia's population is growing. So if we look out maybe 5-10 years from now, the population is going to be larger, which is going to leave a lot more room for increased consumption of seafood products. A lot of the global growth in seafood demand has been sort of driven by not only changing preferences, but also just the pure fact that the number of people are growing. So more room there.
Yeah, but I just counter that. If you do the projections, by 2050, 93% of every seafood sold in Australia comes from overseas. So I think we have a challenge. If we really want to maintain our presence in the domestic market, we're going to have more Serenas, more Ericas, lots of people producing more seafood. Is there any questions? Yes, Veronica.
Hello. My question is for Stephen Clark. When you were looking at kingfish and you were comparing it to salmon, did you compare it to, in a similar vein question to what Patrick was asking of the cobia, did you compare it to barramundi, which farm barramundi, which are in a similar process to kingfish, and how did that, and if you did, how did that level out?
I didn't for this presentation, just to keep it simple. Obviously, we're hearing it can compete with a whole range of species. I think barramundi is a good comparison. At the moment, the markets are well differentiated, both domestically and internationally, I believe. And I personally think that in the longer term, that will also be done to a large degree. So I think there's opportunity for both to grow. The challenge is probably more on the domestic market. As Patrick said, there's a certain volume, and people will make the decisions of whether they buy this or that, and it's going to range on awareness, price, all sorts of little things like that. But yellowtail kingfish, there is an increasing awareness, increasing number of people that I know that are targeting the purchase of that, just the same way as they've targeted salmon in the past. So I think it's up to astute marketing by the companies involved, but certainly there will be competition, but hopefully the market's growing and there's the international market as well as the domestic market.
Yeah, Barwick.
My question is for Rob Catotti. Rob, the summary looking forward of opportunities for growth for commercial fisheries, it's really well put and quite dynamic. I just wondered if you had any comments on the opportunities to maybe for future analysis to integrate observation on changes in recreational time use and urbanisation and how that might impact on the other sectors, the Indigenous and recreational sectors looking forward?
I think there's always, that's sort of one of the areas, the challenging areas of fisheries, how you sort of integrate across the various sectors and that sort of thing. And it's certainly sort of a focus area about how to get the resource sharing right between sectors and that sort of thing. The Senator this morning mentioned the inclusion of new objectives in the Management Act to sort of get that right. So I think it's all happening, and I think we'll see a little bit more of that sort of stuff in future.
It's going to be a common question on cobia.
I got two for you, Patrick. Well, one is a comment really on ABARES data. You raised the point, Patrick, that 2050, it's going to be 93% imported. It's already in the 80s now, high 70s, 80s. Yeah. So, Robert, you made the point that our population will be growing over the years to come, but when I last analysed your ABARES data, which is very valuable, thank you, it showed that our per person consumption is going down of seafood, which is what Patrick pointed out, that is a very competitive marketplace. And I think Australia needs to probably take a little look at where we're going with that, because it's not actually sustainable in the future to keep growing seafood if we're not going to eat it. And if we're only relying on population growth to have a domestic market, I think we're going to end up in trouble. So that's a longer term view. I don't know if you've got any comments on that.
Sure.
There.
Well, I always look to the salmon industry and what it's been able to do over the last 20 or 30 years. Like, if you look back in time, the salmon consumption per person was something like of the order of 0.7 kilos per person. Through marketing of that product and just getting it out in front of people in the supermarkets, you see it everywhere now. They're able to really sort of lift the consumption, probably faster consumption growth per person than other sort of comparative protein sources. So when you look at it that way, there are things that industry can do to sort of grow the product, and I think that's probably why we're getting a lot of interest in different sort of aquaculture products coming to market, and I think that sort of growth will build on itself. Like when you're seeing salmon alongside kingfish, maybe perhaps cobia in future and that sort of thing, people are starting to get choice and that sort of thing in the markets. I think that will sort of build its own demand alongside with increased population. So that's just one aspect, but the other aspect, of course, the marketing is quite important as well.
I think, Eric, could just a comment, it's, everyone knows I have an enormous passion for the wild fishery. We've lost 100,000 tonnes of production since 2001. So the data hides the granularity. The aquaculture has filled that loss. So we've ended up sitting in that 15 to 16 kilos per person per year, and so we just flatline on per capita consumption. And really the big story about seafood is what we do to rebuild our fish stocks and rebuild that access and maintain that production of those fish stocks. So to me, there's it's the problem with the data. You have to look at the granularity behind it. Obviously, aquaculture has filled some of that gap, but that 100,000 tonne loss is a big loss.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sorry. Obviously. Thanks. Yeah, I think that's interesting comment there, Patrick, but we're still not eating enough seafood as a population. And while it's great what salmon have done, and I think it's a terrific marketing story that they have done, I just worry that that is repeatable with other species. And 30 years ago, they also had a protection that no other salmon could come in to Australia. So now, which brings me to my second point, and that microphone keeps going off, is what Serena has raised, how easy it is to import seafood and the risks associated with that. I believe the barramundi industry's got an issue at the moment as well. We saw the devastation that white spot caused and the loss of industry and profits and local seafood. That is so easily replaced with imports and the risks increase. Are we ever going to get serious about that? So Serena raised some very good points, and maybe you could give us 3 things you'd love to see tomorrow, Serena, in terms of biosecurity. Or 2.
Science-based risk assessment on imports. That's all. Not lobby group driven.
Very simple. There's a question list here. And I'm mindful that we've now gone 5 minutes into your lunch.
Yeah, thanks panel for their talks. I have one question from Matt Ruther. And so you talk about the sustainability of the harvest in your company. And so if you assume that it's not 100% sustainable, how would you make sure that first it's reasonably sustainable considering the high demand in China? And the second thing is that we're talking about the live export. So it's very important to make sure that the animal welfare is maintained. And my question is that whether you use specialized scientists in your R&D section, if there is any, to make sure that the live lobster is in a good condition during the export, because they have no air, no water, nothing, packed in the boxes for a long time from Australia to China. So how would you make sure that the animal is in a good condition, and how would you make sure it's 100% or very reasonably sustainable in terms of the harvest? Thanks.
Sure, so they're good questions and obviously very topical. From a sustainability point of view, the industry, since implementing quota, has taken a very conservative approach to quota. When we went from pre-quota catching over 12,000 tonnes to 5,000 tonnes under quota, and it's now sitting at around about 6,300 tonnes, and by all accounts the stock is now close to virgin levels. So for us it's really important that we maintain that, and from a sustainability point of view, but economically it works as well, because supply and demand in a fast-moving product like lobster ultimately is what will drive value. So managing that supply side is really important, and it also achieves the environmental and sustainability targets as well. So they work hand in hand. They don't compete against each other. We don't take the view that the market's going hot, so we should put more product into the market. If the market's going hot, our product is going to be worth more at the supply that we've currently got. So that sort of talks to the general philosophy of the fishery. In terms of the live trade side of things, so that's something that we as an organisation have always put and invested heavily in the R&D of. We're really proud of what we've been able to achieve in the live exports of rock lobster, leading the world in R&D and the quality, the arrival of quality. And our organisation has 5 values. At the top is the safety of our employees, which is understandable, and only second only to that is the health and quality of our lobster. So every single step of the way, we're tracking the quality and the health of our lobster right the way through to the end consumer's door. And it's something that we take very seriously, again, because socially and it's a responsibility, but economically it works as well. So to us it works hand in hand. You can't manage a live export business without managing the health of the animal the whole way through the supply chain. So very, very critical for us. And you know, like I say, in a world of live seafood trade, I'm pretty proud of the fact that we lead the charge, and our quality speaks for itself.
I'm going to wrap it up there so you can get to lunch. Can I just do a couple of things? Again, acknowledge you, Senator Richard Colbeck, for amazing support for many, many years, and good luck for your today's meeting. Again, just closing to remind everyone of the First People of Australia, the Indigenous Australians, and the enormous contribution, and we didn't get enough maybe talk about that. You know, I'd love to see that Abrolhos brand, maybe thinking about how you can partner with Indigenous Australian. I will acknowledge Colin Tannehill up there, who's doing an amazing job just as a private company, working through the Indigenous and working out how his company can do a small contribution. Well, it's actually not just a small amazing contribution to Indigenous Australians. And then finally, I'd just like to thank all the speakers for keeping on time, really rich in content and great talks. If anybody's got other questions, please come up to them. They'll be around at lunch. Remind you again, the latest Fish magazine's got a lot of detail, and I'm hoping you're all downloading the app so that a certain other app goes out of existence. Thank you. Your friends.